Hi everyone, how are you? This is Monday. It's been a while since I released a video on Monday, so hopefully it will be a nice surprise. I don't know what's happening to me at the moment, My hair doesn't make sense. My clothes, maybe my sense of fashion doesn't make sense. Don't know if it ever has. And just the frequency of my videos and when I post them doesn't make sense. But here we are. I think it's quite a lot of things happening in my life at the moment, and I occasionally feel like contracting energy where I don't have a lot of energy, and then it just releases and I just need to get stuff out. So I wanted to explore a little bit further this idea of the relationship between INFJs and the Transcendent in response to some responses to recent videos I released about INFJs and religion and INFJs and changing the world, but also in terms of what is likely to be an important theme of my next book. So speaking of books, my next book will be, I haven't started writing it, but I plan to start as soon as I've managed to get a bit more stability in my life, because I'm changing countries, I'm changing jobs. I was going to say I changed marital status recently. I got married to the love of my life, of course. But anyway, so the Ecstatic Soul is the original. Many of you guys have read this, but for those who haven't, check it out. Links below. Less than $10. One of the current reference books on the INFJ type. If you want to go deep, it's available on Amazon for less than 10 quid. Same for the Infinite Castle, an exploration of angst in modern society from the point of view of someone who's rumored to be an unhealthy, tortured INFJ, maybe a badly alienated INFJ. So very nice product, also less than $10. And Patreon page is, if you want to support me on Patreon, get some access to some bonus content in exchange of the community. And overall, most people on Patreon, I think they're just activated by a desire to support me and help me produce my content, for which I'm infinitely grateful. It really helps the channel, whatever you do. So thank you for that. Now, INFJs and Transcendence. I think in response to a video that I released recently, there were a couple people who made the excellent point that, if one of the goals for INFJ is reaching a certain sense of self-fulfillment in the world, the key is to recover a sense of reaching ethically, religiously perhaps, or spiritually I should say, but also ethically, reaching beyond merely human flourishing. Now, that carries a strong meaning to it, but it is true that as such, it opens itself up to the, to the repartee, to the response that shouldn't we really start with merely human flourishing? Isn't that a good start, since it's something that is not exactly attained in our world? So I think that's one way that you could sort of answer both questions at once, provide the beginning of a reflection on both fronts with a single line, suggested investigative line, is to say, it may just be that as far as INFJs are concerned, the flourishing of INFJs as humans, maybe the flourishing of a lot of INFJs as humans, the key resides in an aspiration towards something beyond human flourishing. It sounds contradictory, but it isn't. It might just be that an INFJ will only completely flourish to the extent that it can flourish spiritually, and that this spiritual flourishing depends on a commitment to something that is beyond their flourishing, but that's as a result of which ultimately they flourish too. So hopefully you can get the nuance. Now, as part of this, I do think that I think more and more, in fact, that a relationship to the recovery of a relationship to the transcendence is pretty crucial. Religion offers a way, other forms of spirituality which are not religious offer a way, certain form of passionate devotion to an ethical ideal that is perhaps neither spiritual nor religious are solutions. So for example, someone who at some stage might have been thrown themselves passionately into that could be a bad example, but into communism. Back when they might not have known communism has led to a lot of horrible abuses. But I'm using communism, but it could be other forms. Working class solidarity. It could be republicanism. Could be civil rights movements. Causes which are not religious and are not necessarily spiritual either, but they have a strong higher good in mind. Something that is in some sense beyond human flourishing. It is for the flourishing of humans, but it is also in the name of something that is overarching and transcends you. And one good marker, if you like, one good measure is, could you sacrifice yourself to it? And all that I've just mentioned are causes to which people have in the past sacrificed themselves. Now, I'm not saying that INFJs ought to sacrifice themselves to a cause. I wouldn't want to bear that responsibility. But there is a sense in INFJs, let me rephrase. There is a sense in a lot of people. I don't want to say most people, because I think we have to accept the fact that there are certain categories of people that find the current modern contemporary world just great. You'll find them on Twitter, you'll find them in corporate worlds, you'll find them this, you'll find them this place, that place. It's just not for everybody. So an assumption would be that if your personality type, or the way that you make sense of your personality type is through the INFJ perspective, you're very likely not to fall into the category of people who are just fine with that, flourishing economically, having lots to do every day, dinners, parties, films. That's enough for them. Well, okay, let's assume that for a moment that for INFJs it's not enough and that there is this need for transcendence. I think that, if you like, of course, that's not going to be just the case of INFJs. I'm speaking, as I always say, from an INFJ perspective, because this is where I'm coming from. So that's my angle, that's my bias, so to speak. I think INFJs are kind of lighthouses in some sense. They show the way because they're very sensitive to these developments, and they're also very sensitive to what was the case for long stretches of time before. They are not completely rationally in touch with those previous times and those long stretches of times. They're attuned to these through the ability of introverted intuition to recover, in some sense, the collective unconscious by its ability to contemplate symbols from internal, like from its internal world, right? So it's not engaging with the external world of now, but it's engaging with a rich and very deep sedimented world of until now, many centuries and millennia. So of course there is going to be a sense for INFJs that things were not always the same. And a suspension of judgment to start with. This is something that is interesting to mention too, perhaps in opposition to maybe, the JE dominants such as ENTJs or ENFJs, where the fact that they have a dominant judging function might lead them to have that, having NI auxiliary, they might have access also, especially if they're NIs developed. They're more likely to start with the judgment, such as, well, in fact, some of them will say, oh yeah, the past was definitely better. And others will say, actually, the past was terrible. We've progressed so much in terms of human rights, equality, and so on. So, no more torturing of witches and Jews. And, but INFJs will at least start with the sense of not suspending judgments and trying to see in these earlier times what was better and maybe what was not better. And there is this sense, this unease that is felt in society, and I think INFJs are particularly sensitive to it, that in the process of attaining all these, markers of progress with secularity, and I use secularity in a very broad sense, the sort of disappearance of the sacred and the transcendent, secularity more than just in relation to religion, the completely terrestrial, if you like. There's this unease. A lot of people feel this unease. They might not verbalize it to themselves, they might feel it, forget it, but it always comes back. This unease, like I said in the previous video, that existence nowadays is a bit thin. It's thin. Something is missing, right? And it's true that is beyond human flourishing. If you look at those earlier times, there is this sense that people were belonging in a cosmic and extra-cosmic order that ensured for them a place and a connection with the higher. that certainly came with, could be seen in hindsight as intolerable hierarchies or whatever you want to call them, but nevertheless, there was this connection. There was also the possibility of leading a life of high ideals, where you would not be a source of ridicule if you did that. So that's the sense of the recovery of the transcendent, that I'm talking about. It's not necessarily going in conflict with merely human flourishing, but rather to say that for a certain segment of the population, the recovery of their real, genuine, and merely human flourishing goes through, or has to go through, re-establishing contact with an ethical realm that is beyond human flourishing. And again, it can be passionate devotion to the cause, it can be something else. It's an open question, The other topic that I wanted to touch on, but I'm starting to run out of time, is this idea, that I touched on previously as well, this idea of the INFJ's relationship to time, and particularly the times that were part of the regulation of the everyday in past existence that have disappeared now. Now we're in secular time, the time we're familiar with, time of the everyday, one thing after another. But the higher times where when you were in sacred places, you were directly in contact with the divinity. So perhaps God's time, the collectedness of, or the collection of all, the entirety of human history into just one moment. Platonic time, the eternity of Plato and the ideas. Also time out of mind, time of origins, where, even in societies that were not Christian but were pagan, this idea that certain institutions have existed since, the very beginning of their societies, without quite knowing exactly when. It's kind of a dark, muddy phase. But this idea of respectability coming from time of origins. All these non-secular times have mostly disappeared in today's society. And one theme that I would like to explore in my book, which is more a hypothesis than a theme, and as you know, and some people have said that in their criticism of the Ecstatic Soul, is that it's very hypothetical, and I will continue with hypotheses because that's how you creatively explore new topics and angles. I have this hypothesis that despite the fact that we live in a purely secular time, and that the higher times are behind us, with the exception perhaps of very small locales, my hypothesis is that the INFJs is, because of their functional makeup, their phenomenology of how they experience themselves is actually still connected to higher times. And that therefore they're constantly schizophrenic, and that they are always fighting between the demands of secular time, which is the demand of the everyday, what they have to do, what they have to, when they have to oblige certain people, help me do this work, be responsible, be this, be that. And the higher that they, at some fundamental level, they belong in. Hence why so many INFJs fantasize sometimes about being a monk or about being some spiritual explorer, because they it's almost like they thirst after higher time, but not necessarily as just a fad, that because they think grass is greener, I don't like my life, I'll do that. I used to think that, but I think it's deeper. I think that there is in some sense, the soul is crying for reconnection with what is truly the feeding their everyday phenomenal experience. So this phenomenal experience of being steeped in higher time, and yet within a broader sense of a secular time that's constantly making demands on you day to day. I think that is the sense of schizophrenia and entrenched alienation that the INFJ has to deal with. Now, that is a topic that I really want to explore in depth in my future book. But that has a relationship with transcendence, because transcendence and higher time obviously have a deeply connected link. Anyway, that's enough for my musings for the day. Hopefully you find that interesting and you're not too discombobulated, and aware that I don't use too often, by my publishing videos on unusual days. Let me know if this is something that actually you find distracting, or if you're liking it. Okay, because I'm curious to hear. It's possible that I will be doing a bit more of that, in the coming weeks, but always sticking to my regimen of the 2 videos at the weekend. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Have a lovely day. Don't forget, buy my Patreon page. Okay, bye-bye.